just put this into a broader context. When the LTAD originally started about 15 years ago, this was on our agenda. And at that time, there was strong resistance from the lacrosse community that removing contact would change the nature of the game. There were steps that were taken at the very youngest levels, where we argue that, unlike, let's say, hockey, that we needed a gradation approach to contact. So at the youngest levels, at the 6, at the 7, teaching body position, defensive body position, and then gradually moving to equal pressure, then into place and push, and then into full contact. That gradation idea was seen as too complicated in its implementation. They felt that players, coaches, and officials couldn't understand it, so it was largely scrapped, and we went right back to full contact with young kids, and which I think was a step backwards. I think a lot has changed in the 15 years, and in restarting the LTAD committee, there is greater attention at contact. Right across the spectrum. I found it very interesting that there is a push at the junior A level to bring in NLL style off-ball contact rules, which is equal pressure. And Glenn can obviously speak to this in more detail. That's not our focus here. Our focus is at the minor. But if we've got professional athletes without heavy off-ball contact, why do we have 10-year-olds doing that? I think that's a fundamental question that the lacrosse community needs to look at. Why is lacrosse the only sport now that has contact at the youngest ages? We don't see it in hockey. We don't see it in football. What is unique about lacrosse, and are we the outlier, and are we losing players in the process? There's a whole series of questions that we need to go through. This is not an easy question. It's not simply, do we have contact or don't we have contact? I think it's how. How do we implement this? What rules need to be changed? How should officials be trained? How should coaches be trained? And how, quite frankly, do we communicate this, not just to the lacrosse people, but communicate it to the non-lacrosse people who may not put their kids into the sport because of the issue of contact?
Okay, thanks, Duane. Jass, could you speak to your thoughts on contact in lacrosse?
Hi, everyone. I think I bring a unique perspective because of a field sort of point of view, but I grew up playing box lacrosse. And I will say I came back to the box game as an adult, and the contact was one of the pieces that was very difficult for myself. And a lot of my teammates, especially the off-ball contact, that seem to be relentless at times. With that, though, I think when we look at our youngest players and we look especially at girls joining the game, I think contact is a huge deterrent in getting girls into the game. We're pushing right now for the women's box game to be included in a world championship, and if we don't have the grassroots level of these athletes sticking in the game, it'll be difficult to compete in an international level, or to even have them have that long-term love of the game of lacrosse. So I think it really has to become a progression, and as Duane alluded to, that there needs to be some kind of implementation that starts and is modified as the game grows. I think that would be instrumental in keeping younger players in the game and getting younger players in the game for the long haul.
Okay, and Glenn, can we get your thoughts as well?
Yeah, sorry, James, I can't, I'm not able to turn my camera on, but
okay, let me see.
I don't know if you want that on.
Yeah, if we can, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be allowing me to, but I'll talk until we figure out the technical part of it. With what Duane and Jessica said, I mean, I agree fully. I think, and prior to coming on this call, I sort of jotted down 4 things that I think need to change. And again, I apologize. I think these are still in place. I haven't been coaching minor box at at that level for a few years, because my son's, I'm sort of at the next wave with my younger son, but I don't know why we have any off-ball contact in minor lacrosse. And my thought on this is you're allowing 9 and 10-year-olds to do things that you don't allow pros to do. And the body awareness, the physicality, and it is such a deterrent from our game for a lot of families. I went through this with my older boys where you're trying to retain athletes, you're trying to get new families into the game, and they come and watch a minor lacrosse game and will tell you we're not having anything to do with that. So that's a problem for our sport, not only from retaining athletes, but actually acquiring new athletes. The other thing, and I don't know how prevalent this is now, but that whole notion of the house in the box lacrosse, where you've got this dotted line and it's just a free for all, where athletes can hammer other athletes without the ball. The concept to me is baffling, especially with the younger athletes. Like I said, you don't let pros, you don't allow the international level to play with those rules. And I don't understand why those things are in it. And in terms of implementation, no off-ball cross-checking is one of the simplest, or no off-ball contact is one of the simplest things to implement in the rule book. I mean, it's just take it away. The couple other points I had was, and Duane alluded to this, was the gradual introduction of contact. I don't know why on ball you can't have an equal pressure, or I believe he said hold in place. I can't remember the term he used exactly. I use the term equal pressure up until possibly the peewee level, where you're not allowed to, knock somebody off their feet. You're not allowed to take them out of the play, where it's a you're maintaining position. You're not allowing athletes to get to the net with the ball, but it's certainly not in a violent and a vicious manner. And I think one other thing that should be put in there too is an offensive charging, where you have a larger athlete that has the ball, and parents get excited, coaches get excited, where they just bowling pin 5 other athletes to get to the net because they're so much bigger. So I think those are sort of the 4 points I jotted down. I know there was correspondence sent out earlier with some points to consider, but those were the ones that I think have to be in there. And again, to Jessica and Duane's point, you're allowing young athletes to do things that you don't allow athletes at the highest level to do. And I think it's a deterrent for the growth of our game. And I think, to be honest, there's simple fixes if we have like-minded individuals, and there's a lot at the higher level that would be in support of these as well, because we've got to build a good foundation of our game. And by not retaining and not acquiring new athletes, it puts that in jeopardy.
Perfect. All right. Thanks for that, Glenn.
Come on.
Okay. Should there be different rules then in major and minor lacrosse with regard to contact? And if so, where do we want to draw the lines at those things? Jess, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea. I mean, we see it in other sports that there's a variation between the pro levels and our grassroots levels. And for lacrosse, it seems that it's flipped, which, as Glenn and Duane alluded to, it's interesting that we ask our athletes and officials with the least amount of skill to bring on the heaviest set of rules. And I think that as we look at that as a whole in the game and keeping kids in the game, because really that's what this is all about. You coach and you're involved in lacrosse to keep kids playing for a long time. So they have that sort of love affair with lacrosse. And if they're hurt or scared at a young age, they don't stay. And that to me, there needs to be some kind of differentiation between the rules that allows people to progress and grow as their brain develops and as their skill develops in terms of contact in both the female and the male game. And I think we like our girls game and our boys game for box, they need to be parallel so that it's representative of athletes playing lacrosse in general.
Okay. Duane, same question.
Yeah, so I'm going to combine the off-ball contact question with the major minor question, because you watch junior lacrosse, you watch senior lacrosse, and look at what's occurring off-ball side, right? They are preventing cutters, they're preventing picks, but they're sagging to protect against the ball side. They're not sitting there banging away at guys away from the ball. Then you go to a novice game and a peewee game, and what do you see? Guys actually pounding away off ball. So the defense that they're doing in minor is not the defense they're going to need when they get to a higher age. We've got it backwards. I was going to use another term, but we've got it backwards. And so at the major level, I'm not sure we actually need to make changes around off-ball contact, because the strategies and the tactics are already there. If you've got a defensive team that is focused on the off-ball side and then focused on banging guys, I want to play that team every night because I will beat them. But at the minor level, I think we do need rule changes, because rule changes lead to coaching changes, and coaching changes lead to player changes. And so if you've got the big kid pounding on a little kid and he takes a penalty and then he takes a second penalty, eventually it's not about the rules, it's about the coaching and the players. So I don't think we need to change the rules at major. I'm free to hear the debate and the discussion, but we definitely need to do something. And it's a simple fix on off-ball. The purpose of off-ball contact is to prevent cutters and freedom of movement, not intimidation. But this whole clearing the house stuff just emanates in every rink across this country.
From a high performance level there, what are your thoughts on that, Glenn?
Agreement. I mean, I think as simple as there's no off-ball contact at the younger levels. I mean, I think, and even at the NLL level, it's essentially gone now. You can't impede progress at the NLL level. And that rule has been in place for quite a while. And it's all about freedom of movement patterns, opening up the offensive game. I mean, when I was playing in the NLL years and years ago, it was a little more physical off ball, and they've gotten rid of that. And it's just improved everything. It's improved the aesthetics of the game. It's improved how athletes, even longevity of athletes, because it's not as abusive on both sides of the ball. But the notion that you can do this with 9 and 10-year-olds, it just baffles me. And I don't understand why this can't be changed. And this house where, and you'll hear it in minor lacrosse rinks, and it almost becomes the great equalizer is clear the house, clear the house. I'll hear coaches and parents and everyone yelling this, and it's just it equates to just hammer everybody that comes near you in lacrosse. And to me, that's not sport. There's not a lot of coaching, there's not a lot of thought that goes to it. And then the ripple down effect is what we've talked about, all of us, Jessica and Duane, is the retention of athletes, because it becomes too violent. And I don't like it for my own kids. I don't think it advances the game, and it's not what you do at the highest level. So why are we doing it at the lower level when you've got vulnerable athletes? They don't have the body control, they don't have the stick control, they don't have the awareness to protect themselves, and you're putting vulnerable athletes in an incredibly vulnerable position. And and with Duane's point too, I just finished coaching junior A, and I would say we've even got to build that into the junior lacrosse game with the off-ball contact, because the junior game is more physical than the pro game. And the athletes at the junior A level take much more of a beating than the athletes do at the pro level. And that seems crazy when you say that, like a 10-year-old takes more of a beating than a pro does. But lacrosse has such innate physicality in it that eliminating off-ball cross-checking, eliminating these types of things, you're not going to eliminate the physicality of the game. The game has it in there. It's embedded in everything we do. But these are safety, aesthetics, game performance issues that need to be addressed.
So thanks, Glenn. So Duane, can you clarify for our non-lacrosse participants here what clearing the house would be, just a general kind of housekeeping on that, so we know what we're talking about when we hear you guys talk about clearing the house.
So you'll see a dotted line on every lacrosse floor, and dotted line actually has some really good purposes for officials, for player positions. But the rule book says that Pee Wee and below, you can hit off-ball players if they're within that 24 dotted line. In above Pee Wee, it's in the offensive zone. So they use the house to mean the dotted line and just clear everybody out of the way. And some coaches don't even call it the house; they'll call it the kill zone, right? And so think about what they're meaning by that. And but you hear that over and over again: clear the house, because if I'm a brand new coach or an inexperienced coach, it's much easier to teach my kids just to pound on everybody who's near you than what a proper sagging man-to-man defense looks like.
Okay, so if we're looking at changing, it's more of the rules are already in place with respect to contact. Do we need to change the rules, or do we need to change how we educate our officials and coaches in terms of how a game should be called by officials, in what they're calling, and how our coaches should be teaching our athletes? Can you speak to that, Jass, real quick?
Well, I would just, and before Jess jumps in, as I just explained, we would actually have to change the rule book, because right now the rules say you're allowed to cross-check off-ball players in the offensive zone in minor and in the dotted line in Pee Wee and below.
Okay.
In the women's field sector, in the last 4 or 5 years, we had a stick check rule that sort of permeated down from the top to our youngest players. And it was very easily broken down into how you would fundamentally teach this skill to lacrosse players. So at first it was mirroring, and then it's hip to hip and stick to stick. And then at one point, I think it's U13, they're allowed to check like out of a ground ball or like a loose ball situation. They can check from the knee down or hip down, and then it becomes shoulder down, and then you're free to go. And what that did for our game is that our players have higher IQ. They are more aware of their stick position. They understand their help if they're coming out of a ground ball situation. It improved the game for women substantially. And I think you can do the same in breaking down that sort of how you would teach cross-checking and contact in box lacrosse, and you back it up from the one end down. And then you teach your players to have that lacrosse IQ that at the highest level we want them to have, so that they become aware of where they are on the floor. How close are they to the boards? Are they in the house? Are they in transition? Do they have their head up on a swivel? Can they take a hit? Can they give a hit? All these things that you teach them in a progression so that it becomes fundamentally ingrained in our athletes. And I think if you move it backwards from the end point, then it allows everybody to be successful and takes out sort of the people who only teach cross-checking. I know as a player growing up, I remember learning how to hit and take a hit. But we had like one practice, and then we had a game, and I was getting clobbered, and it was not the best part of the game. And then you learn really quick how to avoid certain players who are hunting you. But it becomes part of how you develop your lacrosse IQ. But if you don't have that sort of game sense, and you're not a player who is sort of on that elite path, injury, as Glenn alluded to, and parents resisting to put their kids in because they've seen the one game and it's super rough, I think that's more detrimental to our game than having kids not hit at 9 years old. If they don't hit till they're 12, 13, 14, then they have some skill.
So I know we're starting to get into the conversation about long-term athlete development, stages of development and things like that, but when should we introduce contact, and does it need to be in a graduated way? Duane, you're our LTAD chair. You want to take a
This is one of the challenges. So you look at hockey, and hockey introduces body checking at what used to be the Bantam level, the 15, 14-year-olds level. That is smack dab into male growth spurt periods. So you've got players with the largest size discrepancy between those that are growing quick and those that grow a bit later. And that's when you introduce contact. I think that's a mistake. Unless it's already been gradation throughout. But if you go from non-contact to contact right at the period where you've got the largest size discrepancy, I think that's a mistake. And I think that's something that we need to take into account. And so do we delay it to midget? By midget, by 16, by 17, that growth spurt is starting to equalize. And so maybe that's when we do it. But that ties again, not just to coaching tactics, but to understanding player development, physical development, about when do we introduce contact.
Okay, Glenn, your thoughts?
I think with some different, we've all talked about changes, and I think there absolutely has to be changes in the rules. And I think the start is no off-ball cross-checking, no contact, get rid of this notion of the house. I think that cleans up a lot of the contact issues, because those are the unsuspecting athletes, is off-ball, running through the house, not really aware. I think the athlete with the ball is aware, and they're aware that they're in a contact area. So, the gradual introduction of contact, I mean, I think you can start it at a younger age if it is equal pressure. You don't have this excessive force. And I mean, the language would have to be worked on in terms of what that looks like. But, even when you play at the highest level, your goal is not to knock players down anymore, because they're too good. So you learn that at the higher level. It's almost equal pressure at the higher level. You don't see guys running around trying to knock people over, and you don't see athletes on ball getting knocked over, because they're ready, they're prepared, they expect it, they've got the ball. So I think if we eliminated the house, if we eliminated the not off-ball cross-checking and implemented a gradual, as Duane recommends, contact on the ball, I think you've eliminated 90% of your problems, because all these athletes, they're vulnerable when they don't have the ball and they don't expect it. When they're holding the ball in lacrosse, it's not like hockey where you can't have your head up. In lacrosse, you're holding the ball, your head is up, and you're expecting contact. And we can go from this sort of equal pressure, contained pressure at the peewee level. And then by the time they get to bantam and midget, if you're trying to knock a guy or an athlete over that has the ball, you're becoming exposed defensively anyway. It becomes a disadvantage from a sporting standpoint. So I think we can work that in, but I really think it starts with no off-ball cross-checking or contact, the house, eliminate those lines or eliminate that rule, and put it in the rule book. These are focus calls. We are no longer allowed to hit off ball. We are no longer using the house, and we've got equal pressure up to U12, or I can't remember what the transition of the ages is. And that offensive charging, I think, too, is big, because if you're going to have equal pressure on ball, you've got
to have equal pressure.
Yeah, you can't have a bowling pin effect where you've got what Duane talks about. You get those 13, 14, huge discrepancy in size, 40, 50 pounds. You can't have that athlete just, dominating and running through the middle when you've implemented an equal pressure on defense. So I think those two go hand in hand, but I think those 4 points, if you put those into focus call, rule change, get it out to the officials, the coaches, I think you will eliminate 90% of the issues with contact and discouragement, and you'll have a better game. You'll have a better product.
Okay, Jass. So you explained a technical term earlier about how you teach in the women's field game really well. So I'm going to kind of try to get you to explain to us, how should coaches be taught about contact? How do we take this to the coaches in terms of teaching proper contact? Not necessarily how technically to do it, but how do we get that message across to coaches?
I think it's delivered in how you would teach fundamental defense. It's about footwork. It's about positioning. It's about sticks in lanes and that kind of thing. And then once you start to make that contact, as Glenn and Duane both said, and I do agree the semantics of it needs to be, but if it's hips ons or sticks on or whatever you're sort of teaching in that piece, it's not that, oh, I see a player, I'm going to run and knock them over. I think you break down from footwork first, looking at getting inside, moving, understanding, like pushing somebody or directing somebody out away so they get a lower angle shot. And then it sort of becomes, okay, now I'm going to get on that player's arm. I'm going to try to dislodge a ball or whatever it is the next sort of steps of that would be. It really is like fundamental defense in any sport defensively is footwork. And I think that's where you sort of start from. I think on the flip side, in younger lacrosse, my son is at the beginning roots of this. And, you know, like right away, it's all about upper body and how am I going to get my stick on them and all of that sort of pushing sort of piece. And their kids are leaning and they look like pylons out there. But if they were taught from footwork up, they wouldn't get beat defensively from the start. I think that's sort of where the breakdown would have to be in the coaches' clinics and how to teach fundamental defense.
Really, really good point.
On that point, Jessica, when I coached minor lacrosse, and when I do the beginning coaching clinics, and I start with defense, I have them put their sticks away, because it's not about the stick, right? It's about your feet. It's about being in body position. It's about head on a swivel. It's basically basketball defense. To Glenn's earlier point, if you can play basketball defense, you can play box lacrosse defense, because the moment we put a stick in a kid's hand, they're going to hit them, right?
Yeah,
and
you're right.
So you start without the stick, and then you bring in the stick, I think, afterwards. And I think that's something that we need to coach and we need to teach, because that's better defense.
Okay.
And that's what you want as the kids grow through. They have that, like, it's a building block game. You can't start at the one end without the other end.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Good point, Jess and Duane. We're running out of time here. We do have a question in the chat from Ryan. Do you think eliminating off-ball contact would result in more shots, scoring chances, and offensive opportunities? And then the argument would be that those moments in games keep kids coming back and get parents clapping rather than cringing on the sideline. Good question, Ryan. Thoughts? All of you are lacrosse parents as well, right? So
yes. Yes, it will lead to more offense.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, our time is unfortunately up for this session. I'd like to thank all three of you for taking part. I really appreciate your insights, and hope we can do this again in the future. And if anybody has any questions with regard to physical contact or thoughts, fire those off to me in the office at james@lacrosse.ca. And
more freedom.
We'll be back. Yeah, we will definitely be talking about those and reading those, and we'll be having this. This will be a big conversation in the weeks and months to come.